those of you who've been coming for a while know that the In Good Faith program is a really important initiative of the Bernardine Center. And it's dedicated to furthering our efforts in interreligious dialogue, and in so doing, strengthening our relationships with the Jewish community, the Muslim community, and the Christian leaders in the Chicagoland area. This evening, our topic, Care for Creation, it seems to be particularly timely. And to get us started, I'd like to introduce the speakers. I'm going to introduce all of them, and then we'll start with Jill. So our first speaker is Jill Zenoff. Jill is the founder and executive director of the GAN Project, a social and environmental justice organization that nourishes, protects, and celebrates life through the cultivation of soil and community. She is a Jewish environmental educator, farmer, and chef, a 2008 Adama Summer Fellow at the Isabella Friedman Jewish Retreat Center, a 2009 intern on Henry's Farm in Congerville, Illinois, and a Chicago native. She was a 2012 Present Tense Fellow, was featured in the 2012 Double Chai in the Shy.
Double Thigh in the Shy.
Okay, double high. Thank you for correcting me. In the Shy, Chicago's first ever Jewish 36 under 36 list of young, innovative Jewish leaders. That was kind of a mouthful, actually. And she received the 2012 Hazon. Thank you. See, this is good. I need the correction. Vision Award for outstanding work in creating healthier and more sustainable communities in the Jewish world and beyond. Jill started growing food in 2006 and has been cooking professionally since 2004. And Jill is a graduate from DePaul University and Kendall College. So, welcome, Jill. Mary Southard, CSJ, is our second speaker. And Mary is a life adventurer whose fascination is the wonder and creativity of our sacred universe. As a visual artist, she works in a variety of media: paint, plaster, fiberglass, clay, cast paper, and pastel. And she's best known as the creator of the Earth Calendar, which has been a favorite in homes around the world since 1980. And I know my home is one of those homes. She says about her work, "My creative work gives me a way to participate in this critical work and to celebrate the wonder and mystery of creation. It enables me to become one small voice for Earth and her healing, one way to be engaged in planetary transformation." Art commissions and program work have taken Mary many places in the US, Canada, and Europe. Her publications include the yearly art meditation calendar, book illustrations, and book cover art. She is a member of the Congregation of St. Joseph, and Mary lives and has her studio in LaGrange Park, Illinois, which is in my neck of the woods, and I know some others in this room. Mary is also an experienced educator, retreat director, and voice for Earth Healing. So welcome, Mary. And last but certainly not least, Sheikh Kifah Mustapha is the Imam and the Associate Director of the Mosque Foundation in Bridgeview, Illinois, and a teacher of Islamic Studies at Universal High in Bridgeview. He is the appointed representative for the Ministry of Religious Affairs in Lebanon on behalf of the Lebanese community in the USA. Sheikh Mustapha serves as the chairman of the Illinois Council of Imams and Scholars, as the president for the Shura of Islamic Family Counselors of America, and as the chairman of the Quran Institute of Chicago. He's a member on the advisory boards of the Mission and Spiritual Care for Advocate Health Group in Illinois, the Council for the Center for Faith and Community Health Transformation, and the American Islamic College in Chicago. So welcome, Sheikh Mustapha. So here's how the evening will go. Those of you who have been coming for a while, you know the drill. But each of the panelists will have 20 minutes to present their point of view on this particular topic, the care for creation. And I say this realizing that it's impossible, absolutely impossible, to give a full picture in 20 minutes. But we'll hopefully do the best that we can. And hopefully it encourages our speakers to provide the most important information for us in a time frame that will allow us then to engage in a substantial conversation among ourselves and among the group and about the things that we have heard. So let us begin with Jill.
So thank you all for having me here today. I'm very excited. It's my first time here. So this is a treat to not only be able to be a participant and learn from the other presenters, but also to bring my perspective on the Jewish imperative in the caring of creation. Is this still on? Yeah. Okay. 20 minutes is hard. I usually ask for at least 45, if not an hour and a half, to do some of the programs that I do with people, and they're usually a bit more interactive than the setup we have here today. But I will do my best. And we're going to kind of hit on hot topics. I'm going for the hot topics center, so it might be a little fragmented. But let's start at the beginning, because it's a great place to start. What is the most popular textual reference you can think of when we are talking about the care of creation in the world? Right on the nose, Genesis. So nice, they actually told it to us twice, the story of creation, right? The first story of creation we get is a story that tells us about the creation of time and space. Heaven and earth become light and darkness, sky and land, work and rest, animals and fauna. We are getting a definition of shape and the world around us and how we interact with that world. The second story of creation gives us the framework for the human condition. Robert, mentions that it's the story that focuses on man as cultivator and moral agent. Both stories are a setup. They're set up. They're set up for the rest of the Torah, which is the telling of the agricultural revolution of humankind through the master story of the Jewish people. It's a people whose faith is so profoundly connected to the land that its very foundations are written in the language of agriculture. Our books, our textual references, our traditions, our customs, even the way we tell time. Ooh, wrong computer. Well, that's just a nice little picture of Torah as the story of the agricultural revolution. The Jewish calendar. The Jewish calendar. Does anybody know what makes up the Jewish calendar? Months. What months? Which months make up the Jewish calendar? I'm sorry?
Lunar month.
Lunar months make up the Jewish calendar. What else? Solar months make up the Jewish calendar. Right? The seasons, harvest, our agricultural calendar is incorporated, and festivals are our history, right? We tell time in 4 ways in one calendar, all through the cycle of the seasons. When we go to a particular month and the Jewish calendar, it corresponds to a month on our solar calendar, which lets us know what it is we're going to be eating and growing in that time. And even our historical accounting of the story of the Jewish people has been shifted over time to correspond with these agricultural events. For example, Sukkot. Is anybody familiar with the holiday of Sukkot? Yeah. What do you know? Oh, okay, that's fine. Yeah, you're right. I didn't ask you to elaborate, just raising your hand. Sukkot is a harvest festival that falls in the fall on the Gregorian calendar, and it falls towards the end of the season, or end of the Jewish calendar. This is the point in time where we are in the heart of the story of Exodus, where the Jewish people have left the land of Egypt, and they're just kind of waiting right outside of it. They were only able to grab what they could carry on their backs. They were making temporary shelters out of sticks, twigs, animal hides, whatever they could find. So they had some semblance of housing security, but their food and water stores were disappearing. And a lot of people thought it might be a good idea to turn back, to go back to the land of Egypt, where there was at least some semblance of housing and food security. Now, we know that we had this miraculous discovery of manna with the morning's dew and water, which followed Miriam's well. We've heard that reference before. So we find that it wasn't until the Israelites had housing, food security, they were even able to begin to wander in the desert towards liberation. So every year, when we come to this point on the calendar, the Jewish people get out their sticks and their twigs and their, now wooden planks and metal tubes and, fancy tent making materials. And we build this structure. We build this temporary structure that embodies this time of transition where housing and food security were something that wasn't a given until this miraculousness of food and water. We do it each year to remind ourselves that the food and housing security can go like that. We get our historical, our seasonal, whence the people moved through Egypt towards the Promised Land and entered into the Promised Land. Those dwellings, those sukkahs, turned from a symbol of oppression and transition into a symbol of abundance. Farmers would construct a sukkah during harvest time in the fall, and this was the time that they couldn't waste going back and forth from their homes in the center of town to the fields on the outskirts of town, because if they did, they might lose some of their harvest. This harvest was what they depended on to get them through the winter months when they weren't able to grow food. It became a symbol of bounty, and they would then take the best of their harvest and they would make pilgrimage to Jerusalem, living in the sukkah, again, along the way. Thank you, I actually had one underneath. But I'll take two. Living in the sukkah along the way until they got to Jerusalem at the temple and were able to do their ritual sacrifices and pay, which was basically the paying of their taxes. Paying of taxes in terms of agriculture. This is where we start to see the structure of the Jewish system of laws and its economic commerce rooted in the very plants that they were growing. How many people here, I'm going to start asking you questions about food. How many people, what are some of the things you think of when you're making food choices? Some of the things when you're deciding what is it that you're going to eat or what is it that you're going to buy at the grocery store? Natural, organic, healthy. Yeah. Where was it grown? Mm-hmm. Colors? Why colors?
Just a variety of colors seems like it would bring more health.
Okay. Yeah. Cost is a big one. Taste? Taste is big.
Workers.
What about the workers?
It's for workers' justice, how the workers might be treated, depending on where it comes from.
Mm-hmm. Local? What about local?
Just locally grown.
How close to where it was harvested to being on your plate? Nobody said anything about kosher food or halal. Anybody in here vegetarian? Yeah? Anybody in here grow any of their own food? Excellent. Anybody keep chickens? Goats? You can't keep goats in the city.
Dead chickens.
Yeah. I'm talking about the live variety. No? So it's interesting because when we look back at our heritage, much like the practice of saving seed, like we do as gardeners, as farmers, passing the seeds l'dor v'dor from generation to generation, our Jewish heritage has done that with our most basic values of justice and repairing of the world. Tzedek and Tikkun Olam are the foundation of Jewish ethics. They require us to respond to the injustice and oppression that we observe in our society as we work to build a better world. Environmental and food justice issues can often be perceived as separate from or disconnected to more traditional issues of social justice. This disconnect leads to the environmental and food justice programming that you see within the Jewish community to be topics of the moment. They might choose a year to focus on food security. They might have a canned food drive, or volunteer at the soup kitchen on a mitzvah day. Mitzvah means good deeds. While these important services help to stave off hunger in the moment, they do little to combat the root causes and alleviate chronic hunger and global food insecurity, and they don't begin to address the issues of community health and human rights, poverty, joblessness, homelessness, and social isolation, energy, pollution, climate change, animal welfare, topsoil erosion, genetic modification, and loss of biodiversity. They also do not begin to tackle the root causes of the corporate power and influence on local, national, and global food policy, cultural assimilation and homogenization of our food systems, and the loss of the local economy and independent businesses, though all are the resulting effects of our broken conventional food system. This conventional food system operates as the antithesis of Jewish ethic. Jewish law builds into it what you see up here on this board. Concepts of Bal Tashlit. Has anybody heard of Bal Tashlit, or a prohibition against waste? No? There's a passage about a grain of mustard seed. A grain of mustard seed, which is so small, it is as small as a pencil point dot on your piece of paper, that not even that shall go to waste. It gives us a map of the excuse me. Not only for an agricultural ethos of an entire Jewish people, but also the beginnings of social justice and the I'm sorry, I got a little frog in my throat. Bal Tashlit, the prohibition against excessive waste, is also used in the guidelines for how one is to behave during wartime. When two people are going at the front lines in battle, there are prohibitions on which trees they are supposed to cut down. This is basically forestry management and food supply disguised in a story of trees, right? And a prohibition against war. So we find these examples, the examples of Bal Tashlit, the examples of the ethical treatment of animals, and how we are given the constructs within to maintain a healthy ecosystem for our animals to live on, to feed them before we feed ourselves, to have them my apologies. I'm very sorry. The ethical treatment of animals. Okay. Ma'aser v'leket, one of our other laws that teaches us how it is we are to go about feeding our communities, gives us the guidelines in which we are to cultivate our land. Have anybody know what it's called with if they've seen the Orthodox men that have the curls hanging from the sides of their face? Does anybody know what those are called? Payas. Does anybody know what the translation for the word payas is? Corner of what? Corner of the field. This is a physical representation of an agricultural principle that tells us how we are to feed our communities. Farmers would mark the corners of their fields to leave and go unharvested so that the members of the community who were in need of help in their own food security would be able to go and partake on their own behalf and harvest their own food. Thank you. Appreciate it. And of course, now you'll get all the clicking and clacking of it. Additionally, when farmers would go through and take the harvest, anything that was left behind or had fallen to the ground was no longer their property and something that they couldn't make their livelihood off of. That food then returned to the community. They would go one step further. We have cycles of 7 within the Jewish heritage. 7 days in a week. On the 7th day, what happens? Shabbat. We rest, the Sabbath. We have an additional cycle of 7 that goes every 7 years. Is anybody familiar with this, the cycle of 7 years? I'm sorry? Shemitah. Jubilee is the cycle of 7 years. It's actually every 49 years you hit to Jubilee. Yeah. So 6 days we work, 7th day we rest. 6 years we work the land, 7th year the land gets a sabbatical rest. This is actually the principles of economic justice in their burgeoning form. This is a way that the Jewish people made it so that no one person was ever indebted to any other person or organization, right? The taxman or whatever form of markets that they had at the time, would eventually revert ownership back to the original person. During that 7th year, the land was not cultivated. It wasn't cultivated. Anything that grew, people were able to come and harvest on their own behalf. The land of their neighbors was available to them, and they were to also feed their animals as if they were wild, and the wild animals as if they were their animals as well. The only physical way for this to be possible is through organic and permaculture methods, that through the first 6 years to replenish the nutrition in the soil, to create biodiversity through the methods of excuse me, in order for the 6th year to produce enough food for 3 years. The food that is the year that you are growing, the year that you will not be growing during the Shemitah year, and the following year when you're going to be planting. This cycle of 7 would lead to the 7th cycle of 7, or the Jubilee year. Is anybody familiar with the Jubilee year? I see head shaking. Yes. The Jubilee year is when ownership of land completely reverts back to original ownership. So if anybody had to sell their land in order to pay off debts or to pay for education, to pay their taxes, they wouldn't be stuck in an economic down spiral. Now, there's some debate as to whether or not the Jubilee year actually ever happened, okay? But it is the principles of the concepts that we are working with. Now, for many reasons, whether it was expulsion from a country, whether it was a natural disaster, the Jewish people have become further and further divorced from their agricultural ancestry. We've become known as the people of the book more than the people of the land. And there are a lot of things and a lot of traditions and a lot of rituals that are no longer practiced within the Jewish people that, for whatever reason, we are not able to practice as a Jewish people. But this is not the case when it comes to agriculture. This is not the case when it comes to caring for creation, which extends beyond the land but is rooted in the land. So through maintaining good growing practices in a contemporary manner, we are able to better understand the rituals and history of the Jewish people. This is what I do. I have a 1/4 acre in West Rogers Park in which we grow 100 different varieties of organic and heirloom vegetables. We have a number of fruit trees and berry bushes that are native to this area, and we also maintain a small flock of chickens. We bring in groups from all over the city of Chicago and the surrounding area to come in for Jewish environmental education, for social and environmental justice programming, for service days, and for training on what we like to call urban Jewish homesteading skills. That's everything from learning how to make a lacto-fermented pickle and why it's Jewish to do so, all the way to how do you go up against your local hechshering body when you want to create or introduce a new kosher, ethical, local product into the market. It's been an interesting journey over the last 4 years. We are embarking into our 4th growing season. We've produced over 3,000 pounds of organic and heirloom vegetables that have gone directly back into the community. We have no fences, as you can see. Well, you can see, there's actually a senior building right there. But there are no fences that bring people, that prevent people from coming into our facility. They don't have to ask permission to harvest on their own behalf. About half of which is actually done so by the community members themselves. The building you see in the back is actually a senior residency building from the Chicago Jewish Elderly. We have a number of residents that come down and partake in the cultivation of soil with us, as they did when they were younger and in their home countries. The other half we harvest on behalf of the remaining people of the community who either don't have access or don't know where we are. And we distribute it at 3 local food pantries. We work with those food pantries to help develop nutritional and food growing and cooking skill sets for their patrons. Yeah. Are there any questions about either what I do or some of the topics that I touched on? I'm sorry, is this the time for questions or no? Yeah.
Where is that land?
This land is actually located in West Rogers Park at Toohey in Sacramento. We're on the grounds of the Jewish Community Center. Yeah.
Do you plan to practice the Shemitah or the 7-year cycle?
So the laws of Shemitah, as well as a lot of the laws about Jewish agriculture that deal with agriculture, are meant to be followed well in the land of Israel. But there's been a large movement outside in the diaspora of being Jewish and back to the land. And they have chosen, as we have here, to, in some form or another, observe, at least in spirit, that's my 20 minutes, at least in spirit, the laws which are provided to us in the texts. So for the GON project, we work on a 4-cycle. We have 4 main growing areas, and so it's a 4-year cycle, and each of the 4 years, one of those areas is left to rest. We do not cultivate it. This is a common practice in organic agriculture to let the land lie fallow. You see these connections between modern agriculture and ancient agricultural, like the concept of Shemitah turning up in best practices of soil management. Yeah.
What was the land before you began to farm?
Well, immediately before we began to farm it, it was rarely in use, occasionally during football season for the camps that they would run on site. Prior to the construction of the buildings, and actually most of the north side of Chicago, was a landfill. So the land itself is actually contaminated. So what we did is we sourced our local and organic soil from the surrounding area. We put down landscape barrier fabric, and we turned contaminated, unused, underutilized land that was taking up human and natural resources to maintain, and we turned it into organic food production. Yeah.
Do you use your chef skills in teaching the community or recipes?
Yes, indeed I do. My training is actually, I went to culinary school here in Chicago at Kendall College, and I've worked at a number of restaurants within the industry, but it wasn't until I started growing food that I really understood the transformation process that happens while it cooks. The skills that we partake on in our workshops, the food that is provided during our events and programs are all cultivated either by ourselves or through farm partners that we use. Yeah, but I do cater, yes. Yeah,
I would like to suggest that we
Of course.
move on, and then we'll have some time for questions after all the speakers are finished.
of course. Okay.
Thank you.
I'm really delighted to be able to be a part of the conversation that we'll be having as the night progresses and have been begun. That's where we begin. And I'd like to begin with a poem by Roger Fry, part of a poem by Roger Fry, that this is no ordinary time. The human heart can go the lengths of God. Dark and cold we may be, but this is no winter now. The frozen misery of centuries breaks, cracks, begins to move. The thunder is the thunder of the flows, the thaw, the flood, the upstart spring. That sounds good this winter, doesn't it? So, we are living in a time of tremendous revelation. And these revelations shatter our previous sense of meaning, making meaning. They bring us to the lengths of God. The first one is a change in our origin story, our creation story. The ongoing revelation of the origin and nature of the universe. We know that 13.8 billion years ago or so, the universe flared forth into existence. And gradually, light, energy, particles began to hold together, come together and form atoms, which gathered into galaxies, which organized themselves to give birth to stars. And that in one galaxy, about 5,000 years ago, a first generation star was dying, and it exploded, a supernova, and gave birth to our solar system, our planet Earth. And after about another billion years, the first living cell emerged. And so in this vast story, in this vast time, in this vast universe, that's really beyond our ability to comprehend such numbers, even though they're smaller than the national budget deficit, things begin to shift. How do we stand? Where do we find ourselves in this story? Our origin story is now the story of an evolving universe, a radically new dynamic for Christian reflection, religious reflection, self-understanding. It changes everything that we know or that we've thought about who we are and where we came from and where we are and why we're here. There are new dimensions, deep dimensions. How did we get here, and what is our role in this project, which is God's project, this creation? The second revelation is also shattering. Shatters our previous sense of reality, and that's the ruthless and rapid destruction by our species of Earth's capacity to renew and to sustain itself and life as we've known it. Our planet is endangered and in crisis. The body of Christ in agony today, and the disciples have been asleep. That was the comment that Elizabeth Johnson made the first time she saw that image. So theology has blossomed and deepened and widened with this new revelation. But how does this painful, the bad news, the good news is the story of the universe. The bad news is our realization of what our role has become as humans. Do we feel this crisis of the human spirit? Do you? Do you feel sometimes grief or fear or concern? Do you have a sense of the disruption of God's creation that is taking place? What does that do to our human spirit? I know it affects me a lot. This is a hard one for us to let in. In a different kind of worldview, in our Western framework, it doesn't fit. And so we're still very much, in many places, in denial. So we might ask the question, what will enable us to really hear the cry of the earth? We're hearing it especially in the connection with justice that Jill mentioned, that it is the poor nations, the island nations, that suffer most from what's happening already in this destruction of our life systems. So the next part of the poem I started with, about the upstart spring. Thank God our time is now, when wrong comes up to face us everywhere. Never to leave us until we take the longest stride of soul humans have ever taken. Our fears are now soul size, and the enterprise is exploration into God. And when we do, when we allow the revelations to enter into us and stir us, and we're led to grieve, or we're led to compassion, what we discover is the God who suffers with us. This has been a part of modern theology, Christian theology. So theologians have found the God who so loves the world is the God who suffers with us. That God's ongoing self-emptying into creation and along with creation, God's vulnerability is the overflow of God's being. That's what creation is, and that's what God's suffering is, and it's all out of love. The cross is our Christian symbol, isn't it? The crucifixion over the earth, you might say, are one of our main senses of dynamic in the Christian tradition and actually in the creation, in the universe, is the dynamic of death and rebirth, death and resurrection, that somehow love transforms death into life. It's being said by theologians, Christian theologians, that the contribution to the great work of evolution, which is happening, that we're a part of, is the law of love. The law of love is the heart of Christianity. Love God with your whole heart and love your neighbor as yourself. And then we have the story in the gospel, oh, but who's my neighbor? And we don't get off, do we? And Jesus answered. So I have a friend that says, when we talk about the neighbor, is it this neighbor, or can we expand the neighbor to realize that it's our whole earth, the whole earth, all of creation, all people. God's love, this reality of love, is expressed radically in Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus is the revelation of God's love. And it's a love that is a little different. It's all-inclusive. It's dynamic. It's intimate. It's a love that embraces all the unloved within the human person, that gathers what's broken, what's been lost, what's been outcast in society, and how Jesus breaks the laws of exclusion, of patriarchy, of privilege in his life. He shows us. He doesn't just talk about it, he lives it. And Jesus includes all at the table of life. We know how many table stories there are that demonstrate that. Jesus is a new way of thinking about God's creation and where it's headed. His reflection on the reign of God, or I like to call it the dream of God. That's probably because I'm an artist, all that imaginary. What God's dream is for the creation. Creation is already a communion. That's the dream of God, I believe. That's the nature of God, is communion, in which all belong, and each has a part to play. Our whole Western psyche has been really, shaped by the dualism and the separation of the Western culture, our Western culture. So this is a hard one for us. But separation is a construct of the mind. And even Einstein said, separateness, there is no separateness in creation. There is no separateness in the natural world. There is no separation in the universe. Everything is intricately intimated with everything else, interconnected. That it's a construct of our mind. And it's one that isn't working anymore. It's not working anymore. It's at the heart of injustice and all the things we talk about. So this is a communion. Our closest image to that would be it's like a living cell with all the tiny, intimate interactions that keep it going and keep it alive. Our astronauts, you might say, are the ones who first began to see that and gave us this icon, this new icon of the planet, which is our home. So who is my neighbor? Back to the painful parts of that second revelation of what's happening to planet Earth. We realize that as the younger son in a parable that Jesus told, the prodigal son, we have been squandering our inheritance, the magnificent Garden of Eden into which we were born. I have a story about that in my own personal life. The day that I realized that I grew up thinking I was in exile, that I was exiled. I was one of those exiles, and I had to work hard if I was going to get back into the garden, into heaven, you know. And then I realized I've been here all along and didn't recognize it. That is the power of story. And that is the power that is possible to energize us in the new universe story, the creation story that we are now learning from science. So, if we contemplate Jesus' story of the prodigal, this is the prodigal species. We're the prodigal species. Let's pray that, like the son in the story that Jesus told, we'll be able to come to our senses. That's the turning point, isn't it, in the story? He comes to his senses. He recognizes, he realizes who he was. But can we do that? Can we remember who we are? We remember who we are. Return home. We have a worldview where we humans are a little superior to the rest of the world, aren't we? To the rest of creation. I mean, we are superior. And so, like the prodigal son, he's dropped all that. He's not going to go home as a son. He's going to go home and ask if he can be a servant and eat at the servant's table. So, I guess for me, I think of it this way. We can let go of our self-importance, our anthropocentrism, as if we're the center of the universe, which we aren't. I mean, we look at the new story of the universe. It's obvious we're not the center, okay? So go home with that new humility and be earthlings. It's wonderful to be earthlings. Jill just gave us a wonderful story of what it is to really be an earthling. That to recognize that we're part of this whole process of earth bearing food and life and our sharing with all that with one another. In the community of life, one with the rest of creation. So now we have the question, how did we in Christianity lose creation? The Jewish people didn't as much in their tradition. Well, in a essay in a series of books that comes out of the Harvard dialogues with all the great religions and ecology, don't know if you're familiar with that, but it'll be on a little book list I gave to you. That the essay is by Elizabeth Johnson, Losing and Finding Creation in the Christian Tradition. What she discovered was that there were three pillars of Christian thought during the first 1,500 years of Christianity. And somehow they slipped by the dualism and the separation consciousness of the Western tradition, which those 15,000 years certainly had. But what was even stronger during those years was the early Christianity. Brilliant and profound writings that we've been recovering just in recent years that were lost for a long time. Matthew Fox had a lot to do with that. The Christian culture, art, architecture, music, in the first 1,500 years reached its zenith about the 12th and 13th centuries. We know, we've seen images of those times. The brilliant writings of Meister Eckhart and Hildegard of Bingen and Bonaventure and Thomas Aquinas, all with that keen sense of the indwelling of God in creation, the sacred revelation, that the book of creation and the book of the scripture were the source of faith in that time of Christianity. The last 500 years haven't been so lucky. There's been a lot of upheaval. And as we know, as science really began, like Copernicus and Galileo talked about a sun-centered solar system, and then the coming of Darwin, the church just wasn't able to integrate that and make it available to Christianity. And so what happened was science went one way and Christianity went another. I'm sure you've heard enough about that. And what really came in and took over big time was the whole thing we inherited from the Western Empire, you know, the hierarchical dualism, a world of separation. And that gave a kind of a background where the whole Industrial Revolution took place. And we lost our agrarian roots, especially the last 200 years. So it made the Industrial Revolution possible, further separation of humans from Earth. Until now, we have a planet where water, soil, atmosphere, all is full of toxins, and we're continuing to make it so. Our food system, full of toxins. How much how many people are talking about this now? 25 years ago, you didn't hear much about that at all. But there's tremendous concern about the toxins that we are now carrying in our bodies, and that is in our, like the breastfed milk of our mothers, and they're giving their children. So meanwhile, while this is happening, new revelations about the nature of the universe continue. And and new theology, and theology is really alive and well, and so much is happening. As the information comes, we rethink, we re-realize, we deepen, we broaden. The deeper meanings of the evolutionary universe came roaring into human consciousness, especially in two men about 100 years ago, who are, look at, they're totally alive at the same time and working at the same time. And that was Albert Einstein and Teilhard de Chardin. Just one little thought about Einstein, who did quite a bit of thinking about God. When someone asked him one time, well, why are you probing the universe like this? He said, I want to know how the old one thinks. He was really on an exploration into God, like that poem said. The other thing he said very clearly was separation is an optical delusion that we have. And another one, which is absolutely so important today, because we cannot solve the problems we've created in our relationship with the planet and the care of Earth from the same mindset that caused the problems. So this whole revelation is calling us to a whole new way of seeing things. And if anyone has ever allowed yourself to go through it, you know what that means and what it's like. The other man was Teilhard de Chardin, an ardent Christian, a Jesuit priest, a scientist, and a theologian whose work is so amazing that even today we're just beginning to understand it and break it open. What were some of his contributions? One, as a theologian, he saw that the unfolding of creation was one single physical, spiritual, material, psychic event, process. And he was the one, I think, that first used the word Christogenesis. So the Christ from the beginning of creation, and the Christ, the omega point, and the whole process is one process. The profound implications here for the care for creation for Christians is great. Teilhard also came to see that the story of the universe was a great outpouring of God's love, of God's self into matter, light, energy, evolving over space and time, and so on, giving birth to humanity and to Christ. Teilhard reconciled. Now, in his time, it bothered him that he had this great love for the earth. So what does that mean? I'm a priest. I'm a theologian. His great attraction to matter was a concern for him. But we do know that within himself, and probably for us all, he really reconciled the love of God and the love of the world, science and religion, and mysticism into one synthesis. And as theology is unfolding today, what we hear them saying is that our sacred story is a love story. The story of the universe is a love story. There's nothing that we can encounter in the natural world, in the stars, in the galaxies, whatever, that it's like it's lit up from within with the divine. Wouldn't it be great if we walked around the world realizing this and seeing it? I'm sure some of us have. Oftentimes all we have to do is go out the door in the morning and something shifts in us. What is that? That's what it is. But alas, Teilhard did not live in times that were very open to this insight. And we've pretty much grown up with this pyramid of creation, with the humans on the top and gradually everything else the lower. That is so deep in me. Do you know I still think that way sometimes? I mean, it's the way we have imagined ourselves. But that separation and exclusion is like a prison that we're in, and we're still pretty much challenged by it. I won't go into this a whole lot. Teilhard, as you know, was silenced. In other words, he couldn't publish any of his theological reflections. He continued to work as a scientist, and he continued to explore and pray and contemplate and write his theology. And that's a great gift that we still are working with today. His work really influenced, for those of you who are old enough, you might remember that the Catholic Church in the 1960s had a Vatican Council called by Pope John the 23rd, which really opened up that very closed, that triangular image of reality, that hierarchical image of reality. And it's the work of Teilhard that really inspired so many of the theologians from the time of his death, when his work was published in 1955, to early 1960s, when the council was held, and Christians were encouraged to be engaged in the world. We at least we Catholics, were kind of, a little, not quite so engaged there for a while. Shortly afterwards, we have the pictures from space of our planet. These are the names of some of the theologians who are carrying this revelation of the universe into a language. We don't understand the scientific language, but into a language and religious language that we can understand. The fact that God has created a self-creating universe is also shifts our sense of what's our, not only where we are, but why are we here? What's our role in this? So God has created this self-creating universe, and right now, where evolution is taking place, where the divine is at work, is when we realize that the future, at least of this part of the universe, which we know, which is planet Earth, is in human hands. The last person I'd like to introduce you to is Thomas Berry, and he just died a few years back. In his obituary, one of the comments was that Thomas was the earliest and most important voice to describe this profound disconnect between humans, especially the Western humans, and the natural world, and what that could mean for the future of our species. He was probably the most courageous and consistent voice, Christian voice, for the care of creation. And he lived in our time. Some of his insights: Christianity and the care of creation, that ours is a period when the human community is in search of new and sustainable, we call it sustainable now, sustaining relationships with Earth amidst an environmental crisis that threatens the very existence of life forms on the planet. I just heard on NPR this afternoon, the science writer for, I forget which publication, just wrote a book, The Sixth Extinction. We are in the sixth extinction since the beginning of Earth right now. And it's being brought about by our species. That's huge. We're bringing to an end a geological era of Earth's evolution. And Thomas was, actually the day I met Thomas, that's what he asked me, do you realize we're bringing the Cenozoic to an end? And I hardly knew what Cenozoic meant at the moment. That was some years ago. But that is very, very profound insight. And he asked the question, is the human, right now, this is a real question, is the human species viable on an endangered planet? In the Dream of the Earth, Thomas mentions, we are in a period of what he calls a technological entrancement. We're so entranced with all the things we can do with our technology and our industry and all of those things, that we live in a world that's so narrow. It's as narrow as, it's narrower than the consciousness that we had when we first became humanly conscious, the Paleolithic, as we were coming out of the Paleolithic. I mean, he could be really serious sometimes. That's his serious face. But mostly, this is the Thomas we knew. The universe is a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. Communion, interbeing. We're only talking to ourselves. We're not talking to the rivers. We're not listening to the winds. We've broken the great conversation. By breaking that conversation, we have shattered the universe. All the disasters that are happening are now a consequence of our not being in conversation with creation. We are part of creation, and we need to be in conversation. In our totality, we are born of Earth. And so he talks here about spirituality itself is earth-derived. If there is no spirituality in the earth, then there's no spirituality in us. So we were not accustomed to thinking of earth as a spiritual, or as having intelligence. And that's what's being discovered today. Without the soaring birds, without the forest, the free-flowing streams, etc., we would be totally impoverished. We would, imagine, he used to say, imagine being born on the moon. What kind of spirituality would you have? And so, Thomas's passion that Christianity has a role in the Earth Project, and that is the survival of the planet is integral, and its integral reality is the basic issue that confronts us here as Christians, as humans. The human project and the Earth Project are a single project. There's no way the human project can succeed if the Earth Project doesn't. And this is a Mary Southard quote. As humans, we get to participate on purpose in God's project, which is the ongoing creation. How are we doing? So, just to end up, it takes a real, what would you say, a real surrender and a real sense of adventure to allow ourselves to enter into this new both of these new revelations. That God's intimate involvement with the creation is creation from within. That we know that it goes on in us. It goes on in all creation. The God of evolution reflects a dynamic God, deeply immersed and in love with creation. Are we willing to be dazzled? It's almost like God romances us, especially with springtime. We are going to be so romanced this spring. Are we willing to be dazzled by the holy, to fall in love, and then to protect what we love? To recognize that we are water, 75%, that we are earth, that the universe is our home, that we are not in exile, that we live in a sacramental universe. That makes our desecration so much more tragic, doesn't it? And to begin to let ourselves feel the flame. Like I was walking in the woods the other day, the trees, they said, don't worry, we're getting ready for spring. You can feel the energy, that light from within. So in the story of creation, in the story of the creation, and in the Christian story, crises are drivers of the next step, of new life, of new creativity, of evolutionary leaps. I think we're ready for an evolutionary leap. I don't know if you do. I mean, all of our political structures and church structures, I mean, all of these are in Christ. They're not working. So we're ready for a leap. It is time for an evolutionary leap of our species. Humans becoming fully conscious, fully loving, with inclusive love, joining together with the rest of creation in the great work of living as a communion, which we already are. And I end with this little quotation, which is familiar to all of us. How all creation is groaning and excited. We're nearly there. We're getting there. But all creation has been in travail, giving birth. Thank God, this is the end of the poem. Thank God our time is now when wrong comes up to face us everywhere, never to leave us till we take the longest stride of soul we humans ever took. Affairs are now soul size. The enterprise is exploration into God. It takes so many thousand years to wake, but will we wake? For creation's sake, for pity's sake, for God's sake. Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Assalamu alaikum and peace be with you all. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation for you. If at the end of my presentation you can come out with this statement, I would have made my mission clear. Caring for the creation should be your path to know your Lord. Submit to Him and engage in worship. Caring for the creation should be your path to get to know your Lord, submit to Him, and get engaged in worship. I'm going to start by the environment, going to the creation out. The term environment was mentioned in the Holy Quran as returning to a settlement, where a place you would reside. We read God referring to what happened to Joseph after he went down to Egypt. And thus did we establish Joseph in the land, to settle in it wherever he so willed. Also, thus we revealed to Moses and his brother, settle your people in Egypt. So the place you are to live around your environment is the place of your settlement, which will reflect the quality of life so you can know your Lord better. I have 9 points to share with you, talking about our perception as Muslims on the creation, caring for it, and I'll start by this. Islam looked in a comprehensive approach toward all that which exists. And whoever is in a position of making any decision that will affect the status of our life cannot look at humans only, nor he can look at the water only, nor he can look at the birds only. The approach has to be a wholesome approach, comprehensive one. Only then you can find harmony, and only then you can have a fair and balanced way of understanding how you can care for all the creation. And I will quote, "The seven heavens and the earth and all that are in them give due exaltation to God. For there is not a single thing but that it exalts him with all praise. But you human beings fathom not their exaltation." When you understand that every creation is in a status of praising Lord, submitting without a will, but you were entrusted to make that choice on your own, it means you have been given a higher status to make that choice and to be honored for it and to lead. And this is what will take me into the second and third points. The unity in creation, this presence of everything that exists together in harmony, creates relativity among each other based on the understanding of revelation that came from God. Revelation, we believe, is the guide that will take us into how this interaction happens and how it sustains if it is guided by revelation from God. We are one human race, and we need to think like that. Any people, if we were in a government, or if we were in NGOs, if we were in entities, we cannot think only of our own race. We cannot think only of our own kind. It is about what's happening to the people in Somalia because of the drought, or people after an earthquake in Turkey, or others because of a flood somewhere. Whenever you start thinking as a race, as a human being, that's when you relate to the caring of the creation in whole. And from that you move out into world of abstract matters, into birds, into animals. And I will quote, "And he alone, God, is the one who has produced all of you from a single soul. Then there is habitation for upon you on earth, than a repository in it in the grave. Truly we have made the signs in your lives, utterly distinct indications for a people who would reflect on them and understand their wisdom." Understanding this source, that Adam was the first soul, and we all came from that one man, it means that we have something to share, even if we have different theories we believe in. There should be a minimum common ground that should bring us together, and I believe the presence of a Jewish and a Christian and a Muslim presenter on this podium is an approach for people who care and have wisdom. Another verse, "And whoever saves a life, it shall be reckoned as though he has saved the life of all humankind." One of the, we call him the second generation tabi'een, by the name of Imam Mujahid, he said, respecting the sacredness of life, that's how he would have saved all humankind. If you understand that a human being is sacred, then you have saved all humanity. You don't have to probably engage in things to save lives. It's just if you understand that that life is sacred, that is good enough for you to be among those who have saved humanity. Because no one goes and kills someone else, no one goes and ends the life of someone else unless he has missed that perception in his mind somehow, unless it is by the rule of law. Also, if we look at the matters that we share with abstract things around us, we have a verse in the Quran that says, "We have made every living thing therein from water." So if it was you, if it was animals, if it was insects, if it was anything else, it is not just we're talking about human beings, it's talking about all your environment, the creation, everything comes down to water. And with that we share this common ground. So what else can I share with things around me? The spiritual approach from the physical water to the spiritual, which is engaging in act of worship. And I quote, "And very truly, before you, O Prophet, we gave David a mere shepherd, great favor from us, decreeing, O mountains, echo with him my praises, and O birds, sing praise with him as well." When he was sitting down praising God, mountains and birds were echoing his prayers. So he was connecting on the spiritual, not just on the water, not just on the physical part. And this is how we need to look at creation around us. The environmental matters around us are to be looked at into two things. First, balancing the kinds, and second, saving the species. In balancing the kind, we read, "So it was until when our command of doom came to pass, and the very earth itself erupted like a fount, as a sign and a portent, we said to Noah, carry in the ark mates of every living pair and your family." We believe that the order came to Noah to carry all that which has existed in pairs, to save the humanity. And this should be something that we invest in families and beyond. And when we talk about also another concept of saving the kind, we need to, balancing the kind, we need to look also about how to save the species. "For there is not a single beast on earth, nor a bird flying with its two wings, but that they are communities like you." And this is also a quote from the Holy Quran. Declaring that animals, birds are communities, the term is ummah, communities, it means they have this share of entity. When the Prophet migrated from Mecca to Medina, there were dogs that had rabies, and they were causing a lot of sickness. So he ordered them to be killed. But then he said, "Stop killing them, for they are a community." He respected the preservation of whatever left. He dealt with the issue in matters of what caused harm, but then he made to stop, because if they were a community, we cannot take them into extinct, and we cannot take them out from existence. We need to keep this part in us. And this is where it comes to endangered lives. We're talking about endangered species. We need to talk about endangered lives of human beings. People who are causing genocide in parts of the world. This should be on our top priority. And our faith, the tradition of the Prophet, peace be upon him, says that to bring down the Kaaba, which is the mosque or the place of worship for Muslims in Mecca, to bring it down and destroy it is easier on God than shedding the blood of a human being. It is more sacred. Now, this environment, this creation, also survives on two concepts: the entrusted human and the subjugated universe. The entrusted human and the subjugated universe. The human beings were entrusted in this universe. Angels asked for that honor, but they were not given that. I quote, Now behold, your Lord said to the angels, I am placing upon the earth a human successor to steward it. They said, will you place thereupon one who will spread corruption therein, and who moreover will shed blood, while we ever exalt you with all praise and hallow you? He said, God said, indeed I know what you know not. Thus he taught Adam the names of created beings, all of them. God wanted this stewardness for humans because they represent the combination of the origin from soil, so they can relate better to earth. And they have the soul in them which came from God as of a creation. He breathed that soul in them. So they were better able to understand the task of caring for this creation. And if they decide not to, then the trust has been betrayed, and corruption will happen, and mischief will happen. Only when they understand their role in life and act upon it, then it will be proven the case that what God has planned for us is the truth. But when they choose not to, they would have gone against the will of God, and they will cause mischief as what angels have expected. This subjugated universe is the place where you need to look at. Do you not see, O humanity, that God has subjugated for you all that in the heavens and all that in the earth, and has showered you with his blessings, manifest and hidden? With that, it does not mean you are the master of this universe. Yes, it was subjugated for you to use it, but the master is God. You are entrusted in it, and it was meant to serve you. So go ahead, dig tunnels, use the science and this universe to bring it to your benefit, but don't claim yourself as God. We need to protect this environment because we owe it also to the generations that will come after us. When the Muslims entered Iraq, one of the companions, he is a very famous companion by the name of Bilal. He was from Abyssinia, accepted Islam. He came to the Caliph Umar and he said, you should distribute the land on the army. At that time, the army was not yet, paid in salaries. Whatever they collected, spoils of wars, they distributed on the army. Umar refused. And he brought this land all to the Treasury Department to be redistributed back on the people who were harvesting it and planting it. And he supported his analysis by a verse from the Holy Quran, which reads, as to all those believers who come after them, they shall say, our Lord forgive us and our brethren who preceded us in faith. And let not into our hearts any malice toward those who believe. Our Lord, indeed, you are all kind, mercy-giving. He thought that the generations that will come and will see that the people behind him took authority of this land and it was taken into personal matters and enjoyment, it would have been taken something away from the benefit of what people will be the generations later on. So making prayers for those who were prior to you, we are entrusted to take care of the land, so we inherit it to people behind us who will be grateful to us, and when they remember us, they will remember us in good things. Point number 6. With environment, we have a kinship, a relationship of knowledge, a relationship of love, and a demonstration of the beauty to bring reflection to your heart. When we talk about the relationship of knowledge, we have a famous quote in Arabic. We say that the Holy Quran is the word of God, al-mastur, the written. But the universe is the word of God that is seen. So you don't read Quran only through the words that came from God. You read Quran also when you look at the universe around you. You contemplate and you reflect. Nevertheless, we shall show them our signs in the horizons and in themselves until it becomes utterly clear to them that this Quran is indeed the divine truth. Is it not sufficient that your Lord himself is a witness over all things? So you look at the universe you connect it with the statements in the Quran, you will see harmony. Then you will know that the one who brought both is God. And that's how you submit. It's a relationship of love, not just knowledge. When the Prophet stood up on the mountain of Uhud, which is a mountain in Medina, he said, Uhud is a mountain that loves us and we love him. You have memories. And when we speak of love, we define it as the attraction of yourself toward that which you see of a perfection. When you see something perfect, you love it. When you see this attraction from you toward it, you have this attachment to it. You love it for that. And these places on earth, things that God have created, they can be recording your deeds. The place where I pray is going to record, is going to speak on my behalf at the day of judgment. The place where I'm going to go and praise God or serve humanity, this is how I would love and I would connect to the places where I reside. And it is also a relationship of reflection in the beauty of that which God has created. And as for cattle of every kind, He alone has created them for you. In them are means of warmth for you and numerous other benefits. From them also you eat, while in them you find glorious beauty. And when you drive them home in the evening to rest, and when you lead them out in the morning to pasture, horses, mules, and donkeys He created as well, that you may ride them, and as worldly adornment for you. And indeed He alone creates that of which you do not know. So they are an adornment. They are a beauty to look at. Not just to look at and keep pausing at them, but to think who made them. What kind of might is to the one who made this perfection? If I see perfection in my own body, how it works, if I see perfection in the system that is rolling around me, what about the Maker? With the minute and a half I have left, Islam protected 5 preserved ideas, and all the rulings came rotating around these 5 concepts. Islam declared the sacredness of religion to be protected, yourself to be protected, your mind to be protected, your honor to be protected, and your wealth to be protected. When Islam ordained these rules to protect and preserve the human being and set up things of do and do not do, it was to produce a human being who would be able to survive honorably, so creation will be safe from him. So when decisions are made, they are made in the best investment of this person. And I will finish with prevention, treatment, and aftercare. Islam was in the business of setting rules of how to prevent problems before they happen, how to deal with issues while they're happening, and how to clear things in the aftercare. The Prophet, for example, said, God created illness and cure. Act on seeking cure. But prior to that, he said, if you are to eat, watch that your stomach is made of 3 dimensions or 3 parts. 1 part is for your food, 1 part is for your water, and 1 part is for your air. If you maintain that which you eat, then most likely you will control the type of sickness, not to go beyond. If sickness comes, which is part of the destiny that God has brought to us, then you seek cure. And after you seek cure, you make sure that you go back into what can you aftercare of yourself. So take an example on illness, take an example on any matter that happens in life. This is an approach that is to be meant to take a look at yourself, at the environment around you, at the creation around you, so you can know your Lord, submit to Him, and engage in worship. Thank you.